The first-person shooter genre has come a long way over the past 20 to 25 years. We started with games like Wolfenstein, Doom, and GoldenEye. Then came along franchises like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and Halo that littered the genre with tons of games and great experiences. There is one franchise, though, that many seem to forget about today. That franchise is Medal of Honor. There is a niche community of gamers out there that do remember this franchise. It's a franchise that made a huge impact on gaming. Sure, the graphics and the gameplay don't hold up as well today when you look back at these games, but there's a certain charm that can be felt when playing these games even today. What I appreciate most about the old days of gaming is that the developers were focused on one thing: making a good game. A game that provides a fun and memorable experience. The Medal of Honor developers achieve that in most of their games. I'm feeling a bit nostalgic today, so I want to talk about the Medal of Honor franchise and talk about some of my favorite games from the series. The Medal of Honor franchise comes from simpler times in gaming. The series dominated the genre at one point. It dominated the genre well before Call of Duty and Battlefield came about. The series includes a total of 17 games between 1999 and 2020. Medal of Honor games were playable on PlayStations 1, 2, and 3, and even the PSP. They were also playable on the Game Boy Advance, Xbox, GameCube, Wii, and PC. And the most recent game was actually a VR experience on the Oculus and Steam VR. It is tough to go back and play these games today as they are completely outdated, but the charm of this series holds up for a few reasons. It's actually refreshing to play a game that is solely focused on the experience from mission to mission. The level design was good in these games. Each mission looked and felt different. The enemy difficulty was not scaled, but they are strategically placed. Enemy soldiers could be found on rooftops or firing at you through windows, and some might even be shooting a Panzerschreck at you. Tanks will be strategically placed in spots in which you cannot flank. You have to fight them head-on in intense moments. Most of the Medal of Honor games are World War II themed. The early 2000s is when the market was saturated with World War II games. But gamers have always enjoyed kicking Nazi ass as a regular soldier, French resistance member, an OSS operative, and even a paratrooper. I appreciated the fact that these games tried to change up the theme a bit. Yes, you fight in some of the biggest battles of World War II numerous times, but it's nice to have some games where you are maybe sneaking around a Nazi-occupied town, completing objectives by yourself, and even multiplayer was offered in these games and gradually built into something legit. And I'll touch more on that later on when I get to the later games of the series. So, let's talk about the franchise's origin story and first couple of games. The first game, titled Medal of Honor, was released in November of 1999. The game was created by DreamWorks Interactive and EA. DreamWorks was created by Steven Spielberg, and he is the reason why this game exists. The concept, production, and story was created by him. This became a passion project for him for two reasons. The first is that he was also in the middle of making the movie Saving Private Ryan, and second, he was watching his son play GoldenEye 007 at the time. The gameplay of Medal of Honor actually closely resembles GoldenEye 007 if you go back and look at the gameplay of each game and compare them, especially those first two games in the Medal of Honor series. The first game takes place near the end of the war, 1944-1945. You play as a soldier for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The mission variety is impressive. Rescue an American pilot, recover stolen artwork, and destroy a U-boat. Your main goal is basically to sabotage the Nazi war effort. The sequel was released the following year, Medal of Honor Underground, and it was much like its predecessor. You complete missions by acquiring items, interacting with objects, and taking out targets. The game also features different weapons and the ability to disguise yourself. One of the things that Medal of Honor is known for is the ability to walk around enemy territory with, a disguise on, an enemy uniform, and just, show your papers, show your identification to the guards as you're walking around. And a few more games after Underground would add this element to their games. Underground also featured missions in which you would battle tanks and half-tracks. There were also a few levels in which you would fight alongside some allies. You wouldn't be alone all the time. And the plot of Underground was pretty interesting because it was based on a true story. You play as a woman who fought in the French Resistance. The game starts with you fighting Nazis as a member of the Resistance, and then you eventually get recruited by the OSS. Something that is extremely underrated in these games is the sound design. The ambient sounds within the environments are great. At night, you could hear crickets and dogs barking in the distance. The sound of gunfire and explosions is great and feels impactful. The soundtracks in the first couple of games were amazing, thanks to Michael Giacchino, who created the soundtrack for the first 4 games and then returned in 2007 for Medal of Honor Airborne. We know Giacchino for his work in numerous movies such as the recent Batman film, Star Wars Rogue One, various Pixar movies, Disney movies, and many more. One of my favorite gaming soundtracks comes from Medal of Honor Frontline. Giacchino did a fabulous job in composing that score. The music almost feels out of place, but in a good way. At times, the music feels like it should be in a show or a movie. That's how good the soundtrack is. And speaking of Medal of Honor Frontline, that game came out in 2002. And this game is not only my favorite game in the series, but one of my favorite games of all time. The game opens up with you storming Omaha Beach during the D-Day invasion, and you play as Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson. Once again, you work with the OSS, and after D-Day, you are sent out to infiltrate a German U-boat base and destroy a few subs. And there you meet the antagonist, Sturmgeist. The OSS then learns that the Germans are building a secret weapon. That weapon is a fighter jet that could turn the tide of the war if it hits mass production. So, you go out on a few adventures and complete more missions. You'll go through the Dutch countryside in order to rescue a Dutch resistance member who has important information on that jet. Then you fight alongside the British during Operation Market Garden. The OSS then sends you to sabotage the production of this jet, and they also learn that Sturmgeist is in charge of the operation. You chase Sturmgeist into Germany and eventually catch up to him. You defeat him, endless waves of Nazis, and then the game ends with you stealing the jet as the Allied forces begin to bomb the base. Frontline was a great game. It was fun to fight in multiple battles and areas, which led to a nice variety in regards to level design. While the game is not heavily focused on a narrative, it was nice to have an antagonist and an end goal. Once again, the music was fantastic, and at times it sounded more like a movie rather than a game. Rising Sun was another one of my favorites. This is one of the few games that actually focused on the Pacific theater of war. You play as Joseph Griffin, a US Marine. The game starts off with arguably the best opening from any game in the series. It's December 7th, 1941. You are stationed at Pearl Harbor on the USS California. You start the game by defending the boat as the Japanese begin the historic bombing of Pearl Harbor. The game then takes you through a variety of locations like the Philippines, Singapore, Guadalcanal, Burma, Thailand, and to top it off, an aircraft carrier at the end of the game. The locations are refreshing because you will be going through jungles and other environments rather than the typical European countryside. And the short time in naval and air combat is appreciated as well. Plus, there's a few missions early on where you fight alongside Gunnery Sergeant Jack Gunny Lawton. He is a cool character, especially since he reminds me of R. Lee Ermey from the movie Full Metal Jacket and History Channel's Mail Call, who was also a real soldier, by the way. You also get to fight alongside your brother for a short time before he is captured by the Japanese, and that adds an emotional element to the narrative as well. Unfortunately, this game did not get a lot of good reception, but I enjoyed it and appreciated it for being different, and there was some cool story stuff like you working with a British operative and a Japanese-American OSS agent. You get to infiltrate an Axis powers meeting, which included the Nazis, the Japanese, and even a Russian trader who wanted to help Germany and the Soviet Union forge a peace treaty, so you got to spoil that. And I guess apparently I learned this recently that there was a sequel planned where you would go and rescue your brother, but because of the poor reception for the game, that sequel title got canceled. Unfortunately, that would have been cool to see that story continue and get another game focusing on the Pacific theater of war. I'm going to combine two games now that are kind of similar, and they actually came out at the same time in 2007, and they both focus on you playing as a member of the US's 82nd Airborne Division, Medal of Honor Vanguard and Medal of Honor Airborne. One cool feature found within both of these games is the ability to control your character once you jump out of the plane. You can even choose where to land and how to tackle your objectives. I actually played Vanguard on the Wii, and I actually didn't mind it. Having the ability to freely move your arms around while aiming and firing your gun was nice and a little bit different, a little bit refreshing in the gameplay department. Vanguard and Airborne were pretty similar. Vanguard was basically the old-gen version of Airborne at the time. Both games featured the ability to customize your weapons. For example, you could add a telescopic sight on your M1 Garand and a drum magazine that could be put on your Thompson submachine gun. Now, going back to the actual parachuting for a second, if you landed in one of the designated areas with green smoke, then you would be able to pick up weapon upgrades and ammo from there as well, so you would get rewarded for going to specific places. Airborne is one of my favorites in the series because the gameplay felt good. The graphics were pretty nice too. The game had this very sleek look to it. The game featured a nice color palette and not one that would ruin the whole game. Like, it wasn't, pretty colors, but it was kind of nice and vibrant in a way where the other games, again, when the texture quality was low and whatnot, like this is when graphics started getting good for not only gaming as a whole, but also for this series specifically. And just like in Vanguard, you could upgrade your weapons, you could earn experience with your guns while playing through the missions. Upgrades included damage increase, range increase, higher rate of fire, and reduced weapon recoil. Another unique thing about this game is its non-linear gameplay and level design. Each mission would feature a handful of objectives that can be completed in technically any order. Each mission would feature a decent plot of land to fight over, and like in Vanguard, you could choose where to drop, and it adds some replay value, especially since the game features just a handful of missions. That was the only disappointing thing about this game. I think there was only 6 missions to play, so you get through the campaign relatively quickly. Even in the multiplayer modes, the American team would drop in wherever they wanted to on the map, which would make for some interesting online gameplay. And it was nice to fight in bigger battles alongside squad mates, in actual battles, and not just you sneaking around a Nazi base by yourself like in most of the games that came before it. And then as we entered the 2010s, the appeal of World War II games began to go away. Call of Duty focused on their Modern Warfare and Black Ops series. EA and DICE had the Battlefield games going for them too. And EA and DICE decided to modernize and revamp the Medal of Honor franchise. The franchise released its next installment in 2010, and it was simply called Medal of Honor. This was the first non-World War II game. The game focused on the war in Afghanistan. The story focused on the Navy SEALs. The game was highly praised, and people not only appreciated the change in era for a change, but also the high-quality voice acting, sound design as a whole, Unreal Engine 3 improvements, and legit multiplayer. DICE created the multiplayer portion of this game, and it was similar to Battlefield for the most part. It was different, but it felt good because they added some elements like a class-based system. And going back to single player, the game featured a legit narrative experience for a change. It wasn't just cutscenes and narration anymore. It felt more movie-like. However, as good as it was, it just didn't feel like a Medal of Honor game. It should have been a new series in my opinion. They tried to use the popularity of the name to make another successful title, in my opinion. It was a good game, just not a good Medal of Honor game. The next game, Medal of Honor Warfighter, came out in 2012. It was a sequel to the 2010 game. It continued the story. Unfortunately, this game received mixed reviews. The visuals were once again great, thanks to them using the Frostbite engine at this point. But players did complain about a few things like low texture quality on consoles, glitches, and poor AI. The storyline was not loved by many people either. And it was clear at this point that the focus shifted from the single-player experience to the multiplayer experience, which is not what Medal of Honor is known for. It's kind of odd that EA and DICE would make a multiplayer experience somewhat similar to Battlefield. Like, why pit two of your franchises against each other? The franchise went on to be dormant for 8 years. Then in 2020, a VR game came out. The game took place in multiple areas, including North Africa, France, Norway, and Germany. There's a variety of protagonists too: pilots, sailors, marines, army soldiers, and French resistance members. The game received average scores at best, and there really was not much hype for this game, probably because, well, it was 8 years since the last Medal of Honor, and this game wasn't VR. It was only a VR experience. Not everyone owns an Oculus. We're not at that point where VR is in every household like a PlayStation, a Switch, or a Xbox is. And once again, we get a game that strays far off of what Medal of Honor is known for. The game looks cool. I mean, I've watched gameplay before, and I would encourage you to go check out some gameplay. It looks cool, and I would love to play a game like that in VR. However, longtime fans like myself would have preferred a modern version of the classic formula that could be played on a PlayStation or Xbox today. I will always look back fondly at the Medal of Honor franchise. I know it's from an earlier time in gaming, but it just had such a unique charm that could still be appreciated today, again, despite the look of the graphics and the feel of the controls. World War II games never got old for me, and in my opinion, they do belong in gaming still if done right. I truly hope we get a modern version of a game in this series again sometime. In my opinion, it could work, and I bet there's a large enough audience of gamers that would give it a try. The franchise has sold over 39 million copies over the years, and it's on the list as one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time. Why is this? Well, it's because of the amount of dedication, effort, and creativity poured into the game by all those involved in creating it, back in a time where games were about the games, and that's it. Well, let me know your thoughts on the Medal of Honor series. Did you guys play any of the games? Tell me about some of your favorite games and moments from the series, and also, would you want to see a new game come out? Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe for more. I appreciate whatever support you could give. You could also find my content on podcasting platforms. Just Google Analyze This Podcast. You could also find me on X and TikTok, X at Analyze This_YT, and TikTok at Analyze This 54_YT. Thanks again, and take care.